Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. There's a lot swirling around. I know it. The government open, is the government shut? Hamas, all very, very important issues. But you know what else is going on? Something in Venezuela, as our friend Bernie Sanders, the Stalinist, calls it, Venezuela. We have two great guests tonight, Mark Penn and Senator John Kennedy. But before we get to them, I want to pursue this, because we are taking military action against these drug boats, these speedboats that are coming out of Venezuela to the United States for the purpose of poisoning our citizens and making money for various terrorist organizations as well as the Venezuelan government. This is very important. So I want to get into this with you because it could get uglier. We also have a number of warships down there. We have massive air capability down there with F-35s, among other things. So it is building up. Now, it is in our hemisphere, and under the Monroe Doctrine, which, of course, Obama and Biden said, what Monroe Doctrine? But we have a Monroe Doctrine, and it matters. What goes on in our hemisphere is our business. That's basically what the Monroe Doctrine says. So I want to lay the foundation for this. I think you're going to find this very interesting on this Sunday evening, and when I'm done laying the foundation, I want to tell you about a little bit of your history that I guarantee you weren't taught in high school. Many of you aren't aware of. It's the first war that the United States entered into outside of our borders. Stick with me on this. So let's start here. Over a year ago, the Rand Corporation, put out a statement by Benjamin Young. It was commentary that was originally published in the National Security Journal. I'm sure it's widely read out there. But here's what they said. Under the authoritarian rule of President Nicolas Maduro, he's the Stalinist leader of Venezuela that has destroyed that country, starves his people, kills his people, imprisons his people. You know, Marxism. I think they call it democratic socialism. Has become a hub for illicit drug trafficking and a sanctuary for terrorist organizations. The Maduro regime has cultivated mutually beneficial relationships with armed groups, such as the Lebanese Hezbollah, Colombia's Marxist rebel group ELN, allowing them to exploit Venezuela's lawless environment for their own nefarious ends. The Maduro regime's connections with terrorist criminal elements and drug cartels have transformed the country into a destabilizing force in the Western Hemisphere with far-reaching implications for U.S. national security. Moreover, after Maduro failed to safeguard an open and free election in July 2024, writes this author, it's time for the U.S. to designate the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela as a state sponsor of terrorism. It sponsors terrorism, it funds terrorism, it does it in part with the sale of these horrific drugs in our country through drug cartels, narco cartels in Mexico and elsewhere. It's a bad, bad government, folks, that directly affects us. Well, let's go on. So January 20, 2025, President Trump comes into office. What does he do? Among other things, he designates cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specifically designated global terrorists. By the authority vested in me as president, wrote President Trump, and the laws of the United States of America, including the Immigration and Naturalization Act, and he cites several federal statutes, I hereby order, and among other things he orders, international cartels constitute a national security threat beyond that posed by traditional organized crime, with activities encompassing convergence between themselves and a range of extra-hemispheric actors, from designated foreign terror organizations to antagonistic foreign governments. Iran, the Hezbollah, Hamas, all of them. Complex adaptive systems, characteristic of entities engaged in insurgency and asymmetric warfare and infiltration into foreign governments across Western hemispheres, and it goes on and on and on. And so he designates these entities as international terrorist organizations. Now we have this piece from July of this year from Newsweek. The U.S. has designated specifically the Venezuelan-based Cartel de las Soles as a terrorist group and said it is headed by the president of the South American country Nicolas Maduro. Nothing goes on in Venezuela without this guy knowing about it and getting a piece of the action. The Department of the Treasury Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, announced it had sanctioned the cartel as a specially designated global terrorist organization. The OFAC statement said the group supports foreign terrorist organizations threatening the peace and security of the United States, namely Tren de Aragua, you're well familiar with them, and the Sinaloa cartel. What to know? Among other things, OFAC said it had sanctioned the Cartel de los Soles, which is described as a Venezuelan-based criminal group headed by Maduro and other high-ranking Venezuelan individuals in its regime. The statement said the group provides support to foreign terrorist organizations threatening the peace and security of the United States, namely Tren de Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel, one of Mexico's most powerful groups that traffics drugs into the United States. The statement said that Tren de Aragua was involved in the illicit drug trade, human smuggling and trafficking, extortion, sexual exploitation of women and children, and money laundering. On February 2025, the State Department designated both Tren de Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists. This should have been done a long time ago by the Biden regime, or at least by his auto pen, but it wasn't done. Now, what else? Stick with me. CBS News. The Trump administration has determined the U.S. is in a non-international armed conflict with drug cartels it is designated as terrorist organizations, it said in a notification to Congress viewed by CBS News. The administration delivered the notification after a mid-September strike on an alleged drug boat hailing from Venezuela. It was the second of 3 publicly disclosed U.S. attacks on boats in the Southern Caribbean last month. The notice calls the 3 individuals killed by the September 15 strike unlawful combatants, which is the same term President George W. Bush, that administration, used to describe al-Qaeda and other terrorist networks. Yeah, an unlawful combatant is a terrorist. They don't wear uniforms. They secrete themselves into the civilization, into the population. They do things that regular army doesn't do. So they're terrorists. So, unlawful combatants under international law. After the terrorist attacks on the U.S. on September 11, 2001, Congress authorized the use of military force against terrorist organizations that are responsible. Congress has not authorized the use of military force to target drug cartels, says CBS News. Congress has not authorized the use of military force to target drug cartels. Doesn't the president have that power on his own? Isn't he the commander-in-chief under our Constitution? Well, CBS News doesn't have the slightest idea. It's just intended to undermine what Trump is doing, of course. The notification uses language like armed conflict, not seen in a previous letter to Congress from the White House that justified the September 2 strike. That notice, which was signed by President Trump and obtained by CBS News, leaking, was submitted to Congress under a separate requirement. Asked about the notice, White House spokesman Anna Kelly said, as we have said many times, the president acted in line with the law of armed conflict to protect our country from those trying to bring deadly poison to our shores. He is delivering on his promise to take on the cartels and eliminate these national security threats from murdering more Americans. You would think that that would be bipartisan, not with the Democrats and not with the media. They have a hate for our country that's really unbelievable. And, of course, a hate for President Trump. Some members of Congress have also questioned the legal justification for the 3 boat strikes. The administration has said little about who was in each boat or what drugs were on board. Mr. Trump has alleged the first 2 boats, including one hit on September 15, hailed from Venezuela, but didn't specify a country of origin for the 3rd strike. So now we get into the weeds, legalities. Does the president have this authority or doesn't he? Well, we have some pseudo-constitutional experts, which are really quite laughable, a declaration of war. We've had 5 declarations of war. We've had 100 significant military battles. Declaration of war has nothing to do with this. I'll explain that further. Well, what about due process? Due process? What is it, a criminal prosecution? What do? Stop the boat and interview each person? Make sure they have a lawyer? Read them their Miranda rights? The War Powers Act of 1973 that was put in place because of the Vietnam War, the War Powers Act, which has not been directly challenged constitutionally, is unconstitutional. You can't change presidential powers with a statute. You just can't do it. Well, what power does Congress have? It's called the power of the purse. It's the ultimate power. It's a big power. That, by the way, is how the Vietnam War ended. Congress cut off the funds, and it ended it. Congress has the power to do those sorts of things. But let's take a look at our own history to answer this, because this is a big issue. Because this stuff with Venezuela is going to get more intense as it goes on, and then you're going to see the reprobates coming out of the woods, the so-called libertarians, the Democrats, the democratic socialists, you know, the crowd. They're going to come out and they're going to pretend that they're standing for law and order and the Constitution. No, they're not. In fact, they're standing with the enemy. So let's take a look at this. Let's look at a piece of history that involves men who actually wrote the Constitution, who actually fought the revolution. In the case of Jefferson, the Declaration, he wasn't there at the Constitutional Convention, but he had input through Madison. Let's take a look at this. Have you heard of the first Barbary War, 1801 to 1805? Now, if you went to most of our government schools, you don't know what I'm talking about. The first Barbary War, it was a war between the United States and Tripoli, we now call it Libya. Why? Because the Muslim pirates from the North African Barbary states of Algiers, Tunis, Morocco, and Tripoli demanded and received huge payments from the United States and other countries, mostly European countries, to prevent them from blocking and hijacking our merchant ships and taking prisoner and enslaving the crews. Do you know the Barbary pirates had thousands of slaves, almost all Europeans, almost all white Europeans? Well, I guess that's why it wasn't taught in school for most people, but this is the truth. Now, this practice had been customary among European nations and the United States to protect the ships and crews navigating in the Mediterranean. In other words, to pay these huge ransom sums. John Adams went along with it. He didn't like it, but he went along with it. He said, we don't have much of a navy. You know, what are we supposed to do about this? Besides, everybody else is paying ransom. Well, Jefferson's elected president. Congress has, in fact, acquired some frigates, battle-worthy, naval-worthy frigates. And he says, you know what? We're not doing this anymore. I'm not paying ransom to these Muslim pirates that work for these countries. No, and in fact, you're going to return Americans that you've taken, that you've enslaved. We're going to take them back from the shores of Tripoli. Have you heard of that song? So what did he do? Well, the Barbary pirates, when Jefferson cut off the payments, they declared war on the United States. Jefferson instructed our Navy frigates to preemptively attack, not to wait to be attacked, to preemptively attack the pirate ships and their holdouts, their hideouts, their locations. He viewed these military actions as defensive actions, anticipatory actions. It's like the Israelis in 1967 attacked their Arab neighbors because they were assembling to attack Israel. Jefferson did not inform Congress of his orders. Oh, wow. Wow. Let me repeat that. Jefferson did not inform Congress of his orders to our Navy. It was understood that the use of these naval vessels was implied by the fact that Congress had provided the funds to acquire them in the first place. There was no, you're out of order. You didn't provide us with a message. What about a declaration of war? And of course, at the time, we didn't have all these other rules. In fact, once the war began, and it lasted from 1801 to 1805, Congress passed an act expanding the president's war power because we wanted to win. We, as a country, wanted to defeat these Muslim pirates that had taken Americans, slaves, European slaves, were interfering with commerce. This was the first war our new country fought outside of our own borders. There was never any discussion about declarations of war or the Constitution or the legal authority for Jefferson's actions because it was really unthinkable. As for the War Powers Act, as I said, it was passed by Congress in 1973 during the Vietnam War. It's constitutionally never been directly challenged in the Supreme Court. But I will say this. If the administration gets sued under the War Powers Act, I'd be happy to represent you in the Supreme Court for free. And how much you want to bet that I would achieve a 9-0 decision in favor of the Constitution, even with the lefties, even with the moderates. To me, it's that cut and dry. The history's clear. The power of the presidency is clear. Congress has a lot of power with the power of the purse. There's other things they can do, impeachment and so forth, but they cannot change the Constitution with a statute. That they cannot do. Now, I don't have time to do a full tutorial of the War Powers Act and all the rest of it, but do understand this, America. What President Trump is trying to do is to protect us from terrorist organizations that are now in our hemisphere, from state sponsors of terrorism who are now in our hemisphere, who have a foothold in Iran, from the poison, the drugs that they are pouring into our country from Venezuela and other places to kill our people and to fund their terrorism, including the drug cartels in Mexico. The Democrats seem to oppose what Donald Trump is doing. Some of the kooks among the Republicans, who claim to be constitutional experts, who clearly are not, same thing. I say to the President of the United States and his team, go at it. Go at it. You have every authority under the Constitution to do exactly what you're doing. You are the commander-in-chief. History is behind you. Protect the American people from terrorist states in our own hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine, this used to be understood, and from pouring their poison into our country.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.